And with that, let's go ahead and get started.
I'm Andy, like Paige mentioned. To give you guys just a quick background about myself, I've been recruiting almost for 10 years now. It's kind of crazy to think, but I started my career at Palantir. I was there for 4 years, and then I moved to a company called Affirm, where I started as the second technical recruiter, and I was there for about 4.5 years and focused mostly on engineering hiring, and then eventually leading the technical talent function. And now I've been at YC Continuity supporting founders, specifically on technical hiring for almost 5 months now. So it's nice to meet everyone here.
Awesome. And I am Heather. I actually started my career in a bit of a different field in social work in San Francisco, which I was new to the city at that time. And it was the first time I had really been exposed to the tech scene. So after a few years of doing social work, I actually decided to do a bit of a career shift, as you can likely tell, and joined a recruiting agency called Bets Recruiting, where I partnered with a lot of different tech startups across the US to help build out their go-to-market teams. Did that for about 2 years and then moved in-house and joined Stripe and was there for about 6.5 years for a very wild and exciting ride. Joined when they were about 300 employees, and I was the fourth business and G&A recruiter on the team. And about a year after joining, I moved into management and was responsible for overseeing both the business and G&A functions for the Americas until I left back in April of this year. And I've also been at YC for about 5 months now, joined the talent team here and working with founders and focused primarily on go-to-market and G&A exec talent.
Awesome. Thank you both for joining us. And for those of you who don't know, Y Combinator is a startup accelerator. So every year we have 2 batches of startups where we give them $500K, and then they go through a 3-month program where they learn about the fundamentals of starting a business. We also have additional functions that Heather is going to tell us about. And I wanted to kind of frame who they are before we kind of dive into why you're really here. Heather?
Yes, so we are part of the YC Continuity team specifically, or as we refer to YCC, which is basically YC's later stage investment fund. And we are investing in the top 1% of YC batch companies. We've had about just over 4,500 companies that have gone through our batch program, and through our growth stage fund, we've reinvested in about 40 of those. And we typically invest in companies that are around Series B or later. We've done some pre-Series B as well, but Series B tends to be our sweet spot, who are really kind of hitting the accelerator on growth from both a business and talent perspective. And then I will say that we don't just invest in these companies, but we're pretty embedded with our founders and provide support to them as they scale their organization through a lot of different programs that we run, working with our investment team on overall business strategy, and then the talent team, which Andy and I are both on, where we are really focused on helping founders on anything related to talent, people, and helping them really build out their executive bench as well.
And for a little bit more context, could you share what your day-to-day looks like? You kind of went into it already, but I'd love to hear more.
Yeah, I'll give just a really quick overview. Just for everyone here, context-wise, our day-to-day looks very different from being an in-house recruiter. Being an in-house recruiter, our main focus is really focused on that specific company and bringing candidates, employees into that specific company. Here at YCC, like Heather mentioned, we support many different founders at any given time at all different sizes and stages. For example, Stripe is actually in our portfolio, but we also have companies that are much earlier, like Series B and C. And that could range from many different things. Like specifically for me, I'm doing a lot of introductions for engineers over to founders, like being kind of like a matchmaker there. Heather mentioned, we're also really helping with executive hiring, and we're also connecting founders with subject matter experts to really help them build out their executive bench. And it can also mean like running a diagnostic onto their recruiting pipeline. So it really just ranges from day to day, but yeah, it's been really fun doing it so far.
Okay, now let's talk a little bit about the overall job market and what's been going on. What are some of the trends that you've been seeing?
Yeah. So, I mean, the most glaring trend, obviously, we see it all over LinkedIn, has been layoffs. Companies that have saw accelerated growth through COVID overhired, and now they're course correcting, and their growth has really slowed. Unlike just what we saw just a year ago, there are a lot of candidates on the market now, a lot more talent available. It was a job seekers market, and now it's the opposite, and it has become very, very competitive. And I do think candidates now have to go above and beyond to stand out. But coming out of this, another trend that we're seeing is that early stage companies, startups, are really the ones who are full steam ahead hiring. They're really capitalizing on the available talent out in the market right now, and they're really trying to snatch them up. One thing I've noticed in particular is that companies are looking for candidates who have more experience, really looking at candidates maybe with like 6+ years, like really kind of leaning more on the senior side. And we can get into this later, but for folks who maybe don't have that type of experience under their belt yet, don't be afraid to really broaden your search and include smaller startups. Like, you don't necessarily need to target FAANG companies. Those are just going to be, in my opinion, a little bit harder to get into. Try to target smaller companies where you can have a really great mentor. And just, I don't know, at this stage, maybe like, don't be afraid to be a little riskier. And then another trend that we're seeing is that most companies it's still pretty favorable when it comes to remote hiring. There are a couple of companies who are, going back to more of a hybrid mode. Again, I think the recommendation here is just to be a little more flexible when it comes to location. And then another thing, just a quick plug, here at YC, we do have work at a startup. I definitely recommend looking on there for opportunities.
To kind of build off of how people can think to narrow down their job search, are there any trends or specific industries that are ripe for disruption?
Yeah, I mean, there are many. Some that just kind of come to mind are developer tools. Despite layoffs, there's always going to be need for software engineers, and companies are now starting to build tools to help automate development or to make the lives of developers a lot easier. So then companies like a Webflow, BuildBuddy, Retool, like those companies are doing quite well. Health tech as well. I think this industry has been pretty ripe for disruption for some time, and we're seeing more companies lean in, like Benchling, Modern Fertility. And then security too, companies like Vanta, Salt Security as well.
One other to add is, which you may have noticed popping up recently, is climate tech. That seems to be a pretty big focus for a lot of larger organizations, as well as really helping to contribute to the state of the environment.
Here at YC, we love startups, and I personally love startups, but for some candidates, they might think that they're risky. What are your thoughts on that?
We love startups at YC. So I think it's important to first call out that risk can be very broad term and is very relative to the individual themselves. So I think you need to spend a little time just defining what risky means to you personally. I'll say that there are definitely some advantages to joining either a startup or a large company, and it just depends on what you're looking for in your next career move and what's most important to you. So working at a large company might provide you with a bit more stability, or maybe better benefits, more formal on the job training, or opportunities to see what at scale looks like. But I will say that swim lanes tend to be a bit more defined at larger organizations, and your scope of work is typically a bit more narrow. And then from a compensation standpoint, salary tends to be a bit higher. And if you do receive equity as part of your package, it is liquid. But then there tends to be a bit less upside on the actual value of your equity. Whereas working at a startup, you've got a ton of opportunities to grow and develop at just a much faster rate. And it tends to be more of an all hands on deck atmosphere. So your level of exposure across the entire business and just ownership overall is much greater. You're like digging in, and you're really helping to build and scale the business, and can often see the direct impact that your work is having on the success of the company. You may also have more influence and more interaction with senior leaders or even founders. There tends to be more creativity and risk taking because things are moving so quickly, and it's easy to break things and then fix them without having some larger implications on the business. And then in terms of compensation at startups, it is possible that your salary may not be as competitive or match offers that you would get at any kind of FANG company, but you will have greater ownership in the company in terms of equity, which can lead to much higher reward potential as well. And then just a quick kind of perspective from my experience. Joining Stripe early on was honestly the best thing that I could have done for my career. What I was able to learn and accomplish in a matter of just under 7 years would definitely not have been possible for me at a larger company. And it just completely catapulted my career in a way that I didn't think was possible. And was also just looking back and reflecting is really rewarding to see all of the impact that I was able to have within the organization. And it opened up a lot of doors for me, and I clearly got the opportunity to join a great company like YC.
And why do you think now specifically would be a good time for someone to join them?
Yeah, so I might be stating the obvious here, given all the recent big tech company headline layoffs that we are hearing, what feels like on every other day cadence, but big companies aren't necessarily synonymous to with stability, and startups aren't synonymous with volatility. So going back to what Andy had mentioned, many early stage companies are actually doing really well, and they are full steam ahead on their hiring. If you actually kind of like take a step back and look at trends on the startup world, you'll see that a lot of really great ideas and companies are born out of tough times. And some of today's biggest and best known companies actually got started during past recessions. Take Airbnb, for example. The founders were very early entrepreneurs at the time and were struggling to pay rent back in 2008. And they had an idea, hey, let's rent out an air mattress on our floor of our apartment for extra income. And boom, like from that idea, Airbnb was basically born. There's also companies like Uber and Slack, WhatsApp, Instagram, Apple, and so many others. The other thing to note is a lot of the companies that are created in this type of environment, like we're seeing today, really have to learn how to preserve cash and extend their runway, and need fewer resources to grow compared to some of the larger players now having to scale back. And then just to reiterate, there are a ton of great startups hiring. It's just on you more so as a candidate to really understand what you're looking for in your career. What is your own personal risk threshold? And also you need to do a little bit more due diligence on the viability of the business that you're considering to join.
So speaking of the viability of the business, what are some actual questions that candidates can ask to figure out where the state of the business is at?
Yeah, this is a good question. And so often candidates aren't sure what to ask or even not comfortable with asking, but it's important for you as a candidate to have all the data points that you need to make a sound decision. And also it demonstrates to founders or hiring managers or recruiters or whoever you're engaging with at the company that you're doing your homework. So I would encourage you to all flex this muscle if you haven't already. But some of the questions that I would definitely encourage you to ask is, does the company have product market fit? Which means basically they've identified their target customer. There's market demand for the product, and they're selling and customers are buying. This tends to be a little bit more important for companies that are, I would say, Series A or earlier, just because that's what they're primarily focusing on as a business at that stage. The next question I would ask is, how much runway do you have? So this means how much cash do they have in the bank, and how long will they last before needing to raise another round? You're not necessarily looking, nor will you get the founders or recruiters or whoever you're engaging with through the process to provide you with an extra dollar amount of what's in the bank, but rather a timeline. So ideally, they would have about 12 months or more in runway. And if it's less, then you should ask about future funding plans. And what you're really looking to get from this question is ensuring the company is not going to run out of money in the near future or go under, and that they have a solid strategy on how they are planning to hit their next business milestones. Companies should know the basic math. And if they don't, I would say that is a bit of a red flag if they really can't speak to that. The next question would be, what is the biggest risk to the company? And as a follow-up, how are you addressing it? So this will just give you a bit of preview into what's top of mind for the company, and do they have a plan in place to really safeguard the business? And then what does attrition look like? I would say it's definitely important to know if the company is able to retain their employees. If attrition, the sweet spot is around 15%, if it's above that, you may want to do a little bit more digging just to understand why people are leaving the company so that you have more data points. And then one last recommendation, make sure that you are doing research on the actual current team, which you can do via LinkedIn pretty easily. Things to think about are they able to attract good talent, and what is the tenure of the team as well?
So now let's think about, like, as a candidate, when you're assessing different companies and you're trying to get a sense of, like, is this the right company for me? Candidates might have some questions that are either uncomfortable to ask or they just want to know more about. So one of those that I hear a lot is, how do I ask about work-life balance, especially at a startup?
Yeah, I know candidates might be uncomfortable asking this question because they don't want to come off as lazy or, quote unquote, like unmotivated, or that they're worried that it might turn off the hiring manager and really risk the offer. Honestly, I would just ask it. I think I would ask, like, what are the working hours expectations, and then follow up with an explanation like pertaining to your specific situation or, your boundary. For example, there are a lot of mothers out there, parents who need to do daycare and other things. I would just set that expectation like pretty upfront. And then also making sure you're fully emphasizing that you are fully dedicated when you are on working hours would be really important. This is actually a very common question that recruiters hear all the time. And I think it's just really important to communicate on both sides. So just to give you an example, like for engineers, a lot of times, like you do have to do you have to be on call. And a lot of times the recruiter and even the hiring manager will let you know that up front. So just, just communicate, weigh your options. And again, just to be very clear that you do have boundaries if that is the case.
Yeah, that makes sense. And another hot topic is compensation. How and when in the interview process do you ask about compensation?
Yeah. And I know this is a topic that can also be very uncomfortable for candidates. And even for myself, I know that's always like very uncomfortable for me. But what I do recommend is it's really important to ensure that your comp expectations are aligned with the opportunity, and you don't want to get to the end of the process and find out that there's misalignment. And before we get into how to ask, it's important to call out that common practice for recruiters. We typically share the pay range for what we're able to offer for a specific role, for a specific level. And that's because the interview process is a way we use as a way to assess the candidate's experience as it's related to the role. And we take into consideration the level, internal parity of the current team, and a lot of different factors. So in terms of like how to ask, I would just maybe start out by saying, like, to the recruiter, this is not my biggest motivating factor, but it is an important aspect of how I evaluate an opportunity. And I want to make sure that I'm being respectful of everyone's time. Can you share the pay range? A lot of times the recruiters will be able to share the compensation range. It's typically not the hiring manager, so I would just defer to the recruiter. But if you are interviewing at a smaller company and there is no recruiter, it will be the hiring manager or the founder who will have this conversation with you. In terms of like when to ask, I definitely recommend doing it before the on-site or the face-to-face interview. Just again, like you want to make sure there's alignment, and you don't want to get too far along where by the time you get an offer, both parties are surprised. And then my advice really is to do your research ahead of time, either on PAVE or level/FYI, to understand what the market is paying for someone at your level and in your role.
Given the current state of the economy, do candidates still have the ability to negotiate their offers?
Yes. The answer is always yes. Don't ask, don't get is the motto. There are a few companies that will say that this is our best and final offer, but it's always best practice to do some research, come up with your data points, and see if there's any wiggle room with the offer itself. But keep in mind, you want to make sure that you're doing so within reason and a respectable manner. One pro tip: before going into a negotiation, I would take some time to figure out what is most important to you with regards to the offer package itself. Is it base? Is it maybe equity? Is it sign-on? companies are usually able to get creative on what levers they can pull across those three different categories. And will often ask you what's most important to you to get you to sign today. So go in prepared, and again, with reasonable asks. And then just one other reminder, companies are typically working within some parameters for offers, and they do take into consideration internal parity of their current employees as well when they're like going to figure out what your offer package is actually going to look like. And then finally, just to reiterate, please don't forget to be respectful to recruiters or whoever is negotiating with you. Thank them for their help and for going to bat for you when it comes to increasing your offer, at least trying to increase it. It might be so that they're not able to, but I think just showing that appreciation will go a long way.
Yeah, that's a great point. It's hard work to be a recruiter, to always be talking to candidates. Now let's go back a little to the beginning of when a candidate might be engaging with a company, and thinking about how candidates can tell their story, and kind of come off as a strong candidate. So for candidates who were recently let go or have recently left their companies, how should they kind of talk about that? And should they share if they were part of a reduction in force?
There should be no shame in letting your recruiter know that you were part of a RIF, especially in this economy. I think everyone's very empathetic to that situation, and it really has no bearing on your candidacy. This question will likely come up on like why you're looking for a change, and it's better to be honest. I don't think the recruiter will harp on it. I don't think you need to harp on it either. I don't think you need to explain why. I mean, you can give like a one-liner, but I think when you are talking to the recruiter, just really focus on your experience, focusing on the impact that you've made at whatever company you're coming from, and kind of move forward from there. I don't think anyone should be scared to share that they were a part of a RIF.
In terms of just making yourself stand out as a candidate, what are some ways to do that?
Yeah, a few things come top of mind. First and foremost, leveraging your current network for any introductions. The power of your network can often be very underestimated, especially in today's environment. I'm sure you guys see it all across LinkedIn right now. Everybody, to Andy's point, is very empathetic if folks were impacted by RIFs or are looking for new opportunities. And people are more than happy to make intros or get you pointed in the right direction. So definitely take them up on that. For companies that you're interested in, I would do some digging on LinkedIn, connect with their leaders, send them a nice note. If you can find some kind of common ground in that message, do that just to try to like penetrate and get in outside of just maybe sending your application in. I would also include any kind of letter of recommendation or references from past managers in your application or somewhere early on in the process as well. That could just help you get a little bit of a boost or signal boost early on in the process. And then make sure your LinkedIn profile is up to date and get specific about your accomplishments and, to Andy's point, your impact that you had in your previous roles. Recruiters and hiring managers definitely do review those. So, and make sure that your LinkedIn matches your resume as well, because those are things recruiters will pick up on. Attend networking events. I think we've all probably noticed that we are having more in-person events, but even events like this where we're over Zoom, whatever you can do to get in front of people and get your name and just like meeting folks will also help you. And then this goes without saying, but always come prepared to your interviews. Have your personal pitch down. If you have to practice in front of a mirror, do it. Do your research on the company, the people you're meeting, come up with really thoughtful questions for each point in the process as well. And then again, make sure that you're sending thank you emails and follow-ups after each interview to each individual.
What was the most standout or the most impressive thing that a candidate has ever done to get your attention?
At Stripe, oh gosh, I think it was a sales candidate. They sent in some cookies, which always, like, desserts will always get my attention. But then we also had a marketing person get really creative and send in a package that they had kind of like come up with some creative Stripe marketing ideas that they had, which like clearly that's a very creative outlet and definitely got us to get on the phone with them. I don't recall, don't ask me the outcome of that because that was years ago, but at least got them in the door and on the phone with somebody.
I remember at Palantir, we were interviewing for a coordinator role. And I remember one candidate, we actually didn't end up hiring her. She just went above and beyond and basically showcasing. She didn't have any experience, but after the interview, she had sent a really long deck showcasing like what she could do as a coordinator. And to me, that just showed like, just she was already kind of doing the job already, like just basically showcasing her skill set. And I think she had like graphs and charts and all these things. And like, she did a model of like how many people she could schedule. It was just, that was just like crazy and above and beyond. And it's not the norm typically. So yeah, that's definitely one way just to stand out.
We know that there are a lot of companies out there. So in your opinions, what are some of the companies that you're most excited about?
Well, we're very excited about the companies in our portfolio. To name a few, Zip. Zip is a very common name, but if you guys look up Zip HQ, they're hiring engineering, sales, post-sales, marketing. Pave, I think we mentioned that they are a compensation benchmarking company. They're hiring a bunch in the tech sector as well. So data scientists, designers, engineering, sales. Deal is also another good one. Kolshi, they're their very first federally regulated exchange where people can trade on virtually anything, any event. So they're really cool. Checker, they've been around for a long time, background checks. Build Buddy, they are, I think I mentioned this like in the developer tool space. They're pretty small. They're like a 12-person startup, but definitely check them out. Vanta, they're in security, and then Whatnot as well. They're in the like the marketplace app situation.
Okay, that has been a lot of really good info. So if there's only one piece of advice that you want our attendees to take away from this talk, what would it be?
Oh gosh, one. I would say that I know things may feel a bit heavy right now with all the recent layoffs and slowing of hiring, but there's still a lot of really great opportunities out there. I would just recommend that you take the time to do the upfront work and discovery phase of what you want from your career so that you're clear on what you're looking for going into your search. This will just give you so much leverage throughout your interviews. And then you have to really get good at marketing yourself and really pushing yourself outside of your comfort zone with networking, asking for intros, asking really tough questions, as we talked about. But honestly, this will just like also reinforce and help you grow professionally and personally. So I guess if I were going to, I guess I'm going to borrow Nike's slogan and say, just do it, like get out there and go and try things and get creative. And if you fail, that's okay. Just like, don't get discouraged. You just have to be a bit patient right now and make sure you're doing some due diligence, but there are great companies out there and great opportunities.
Similar to Heather, I mean, I think just do your research. To give you guys like more insight, I also did I started in marketing during my first job and I really hated it. And I didn't know what I wanted to do. And I knew recruiting was actually a field I wanted to get into. And I was networking a lot with some friends who were already in there, and an opportunity happened to come up. It was a contractor role and I just went for it. I was like, I'm just going to do it because I knew I wanted to be in recruiting. And then that's how I landed at Palantir. And then funny enough, I actually interviewed at Stripe after Palantir. I didn't get the job. I was devastated. I realized actually looking back, I probably was just so new at interview. I just wasn't a good interviewer, I had realized. And what I did after that was I actually, talked to a friend who's really good at interviewing, and she basically prepped me so much. Like we went to a Barnes and Nobles. I don't even know if those exist anymore, but we went to like a coffee shop. And then she basically like she threw in a bunch of questions at me and really prepared me for my next interview, which was for a firm. And she honestly over prepared me. Like going into that interview, I felt so confident and I got the job within, the next day. So I really recommend everyone just to maybe be a little bit more self-aware. Like if you don't get the job, maybe just do a little bit of digging into like maybe why, and then don't be afraid to just ask for help. Like really just do it. Like I was really devastated over my rejection and we're like shedding a couple of tears. And then I was just kind of like, okay, I just like need to do better. So that's some advice I would give if anyone's in that situation.
I want to jump into and just touch on one of the questions in the chat, which is there anything specific or different when looking at senior leadership roles? One thing I would definitely leverage for more senior director and above leadership roles is VC talent partners. Like start connecting with those individuals because they are very plugged in into the startup scene and can often help if they don't have anything within their portfolio specifically. Like we will often make introductions to other talent partners across different VCs to try to get good talent plugged into good companies. So that's also another avenue to try if you're on the senior leadership side.
Yeah, definitely +1 to that.